The unanswered mystery is what stays with us the longest, and it's what we'll remember in the end. This is from the opening cutscene of Alan Wake, and it perfectly sums up a major reason that this game is so enthralling to me. I will be attempting to explain the story and explore its angles and layers, but at the end of the day, the very thing that makes Alan Wake so good is that it's impossible to fully explain. It's an unanswered mystery, and the act of pursuing its meaning is the joy of the game. The search for truth is something that resonates with all of us, and Sam Lake and Remedy understand this.
Till in the stillness of wonder and still in its misty crown, the muse she went down to the lake, and in the waves she drowned. And now to see your love set free, you will meet the witch's cabin key. Find the lady of the light, gone mad with the night. That's how you reshape destiny.
Let's go through the story as I see it. We open with a monologue by Alan about the aforementioned unsolvable mystery, and it's revealed that we are in Alan's dream, in which he is fighting dark figures with a flashlight and a gun. He finally makes his way to a lighthouse, but not before being told a riddle of sorts by a strange light, which goes like this. For he did not know that beyond the lake he called home, there lied a deeper and darker ocean green, where waves are both wilder and more serene. To its ports I've been, to its ports I've been. What does it mean? I have no idea, neither does Alan Wake. But after making it to the lighthouse, Alan wakes up next to his wife, Alice. They are visiting the town of Bright Falls in order to take a break from work. Alan is a writer, currently undergoing a 2-year period of writer's block, and his agent and his best friend, Barry, has advised them to take a vacation. Now, there are a bunch of characters in the diner, and I could go more in depth about them, but let's confine ourselves somewhat for the sake of the length of this video. Alan and his wife get to the cabin, which is on Cauldron Lake, which was formed by a volcanic eruption. Alan's wife is extremely afraid of the dark, and so Alan has told her about the clicker. No, not that type of clicker, but an unattached light switch that used to keep him from being afraid as a kid. His mom gave it to him and told him that Alan's father had given it to her. Now, Alan never knew his father, and so the clicker meant a lot to him, much more so than just keeping him from being afraid of his physical darkness, but his emotional darkness as well. Let this sink in. If Alan never knew his father, this little light switch may have in fact been the only proof that Alan had that his dad loved him. I would argue, and I don't think anyone would disagree, that we all require the love of somebody else, especially as a kid, to stave off our own darkness. The origins of the clicker are such a short and minute part of the game that it's very easy to miss it. But the clicker ends up being the weapon that eventually defeats the dark presence. So it's not something that we can just ignore. Now, Alice doesn't believe Alan when he tells this story of the clicker, but she accepts the gift anyway. While at the cabin on Cauldron Lake, Alice reveals to Alan that they are not actually there for vacation. They're going to see a psychiatrist that specializes in breaking writer's block, Dr. Emil Hartman. Alan is furious because he just wanted to not think about writing at all on this trip, and he is probably irritated that Alice, and probably Barry too, didn't tell him about the purpose of the trip. They tricked him. However, that does beg the question, why did they trick him? There are hints throughout the game that Alan has a temper. Writer's block can be a frustrating experience, and for a professional author coming off of a popular series about a detective, it has to be hard. At this point, it's important that I step away from the summary for a second and make a meta comparison, because Remedy, the company that made Alan Wake, had just finished, a few years prior, a series called Max Payne, which centered around a detective. And Remedy was very transparent around the fact that it was kind of difficult to make Alan Wake. It took a long time. It was hard to adjust to writing about something other than a detective. Now, in-game Alan has had writer's block for 2 years since his last detective book. That doesn't line up with the real-life gap between Remedy's games, Alan Wake in 2010 and Max Payne 2 in 2003. However, looking into it a little more closely reveals a very interesting detail. Alan Wake was said to be in development for 5 years, meaning the spark of the idea occurred in 2005, thus lining up perfectly with the 2-year mark since Remedy's last detective game. I do not believe this to be a coincidence. On top of the multi-layered story of Alan Wake itself, there's also a meta-narrative relating to Remedy's development of the game. Wow. Now, angry at Alice, Alan storms out of the cabin despite her protest that it's dark and she doesn't want to be alone. And Alan isn't just thoughtless here, he is downright mean. He says, and I quote, "I knew she wouldn't follow me in the dark." He knows how deathly scared Alice is, and he uses it to prevent her from following him. Now, we don't know how this would have played out. Maybe Alan would have immediately gone back and apologized, maybe he would have stayed mad, we don't know. Because it is at this moment that the dark presence acts, and Alice is pulled into the lake. Or maybe she just falls, and there is no supernatural presence at all. Or maybe Alan pushes her in his rage and he blocks it out of his memory. Or maybe she's metaphorically lost to Alan because he left her and they separated. As is very typical in this game, it's hard to say which is true, and that's what makes every event in this game so very interesting. I would say, in general, there tends to be a few different interpretations of the game. The most common is the supernatural interpretation, which is what most videos that you see or most reviews will go over. And that's the very surface layer of the game, in my opinion. It's cool, but it's not all there is. There's also the meta-narrative interpretation, which we've discussed, which is Remedy writing a game about writing a game. And then there's the Alan Wake is insane interpretation, in which he is just crazy and he hallucinates everything, and nothing's real. This is addressed directly in the game, by the way. There is then also the Alan Wake is trying to become a better person, and the dark place is a metaphor for depression, perhaps? Being lost, being unable to work one's way out of one's own mind. As soon as Alan hears Alice in trouble, he rushes back, only to see her sinking beneath the murky waters of the lake. He immediately dives in to save her, blacking out and waking up 1 week later having crashed his car with no memory of how he got there. Fighting his way through Taken, shadowy figures of the townspeople, with his flashlight and weaponry, Wake discovers loose pages of a manuscript entitled Departure by Alan Wake. He has no memory of writing these pages, but as the story progresses, he realizes that they are forming the events that occur. The real world is being affected by the writing on the pages. I think there's a very specific manuscript page that illustrates this point quite well.
I lifted the page in front of my eyes and read it. In it, I lifted the page in front of my eyes and read it. In it, I lifted the page in front of my eyes and read it. In it, I lifted the page in front of my...
Yeah, that is a real page from the game. Anyway, Sheriff Sarah Breaker arrests Alan after he stumbles through the woods and makes it to a gas station. Alan tries to tell her that his wife has been taken, but Sarah does not believe him, and proceeds to gaslight Alan by telling him the cabin he just stayed in was destroyed in a volcanic eruption and sunk to the bottom of the lake years ago. At the police station, some guy claiming to be the kidnapper calls Alan on his cell phone and tells him to meet him at Lover's Peak. Alan is about to leave when he is intercepted by Dr. Emil Hartman, who Alan is immediately antagonistic towards. "Did you talk to my wife?" Alan asks accusingly, and Hartman responds pretty reasonably, I think. "Yeah, we set up an appointment for you." Obviously, in Alan's hyper-paranoid state, justified or unjustified, he sees this as Hartman admitting to arranging Alice's kidnapping, and Alan punches Hartman in the face. Just when things are getting out of hand, in steps Barry, the best bro any main protagonist could ask for. "Hands off my client," he says. And when Barry talks, people listen. And Barry, in turn, listens to Alan's story, and though he doesn't exactly believe him, he believes that Alice needs help. He tries his best to verify that Alan is still sane, but he eventually does let Alan go meet the kidnapper, which he does, and the kidnapper demands the entire manuscript of Departure. Alan protests that he doesn't have enough time, and the kidnapper gives him a deadline of 2 days. Reminds me of when people try to push for a game to come out before it's ready, whether they be fans or publishers. Perhaps Remedy was poking fun at this. Alan and Barry follow a lead to get more pages that turns out to be a trap set by the Dark Presence under the guise of the Diner Girl. Agent Nightingale shows up to capture Alan for some reason that's never actually explained. And in fact, it only occurs to me just now that I don't know why the FBI was there. Okay, actually, after looking into it, apparently some lore explains that Agent Nightingale was a rogue agent and that he was fired by the FBI several months before the events of the game even happened. So I actually don't know what he's doing there. I guess I just took it as a matter of course that, yeah, the FBI would be after Alan. I mean, everyone else is. Why not the FBI too, right? It's funny how I just kind of accepted that. Anyway, Nightingale's a maniac and shoots at Wake immediately, causing him to flee into the woods. Alan tracks down the kidnapper, who turns out to not be a real kidnapper at all, but rather a pawn in a larger game. Alan and the kidnapper are both thrown back into the lake by the Dark Presence, but not before Alan heroically lights a flare in his plummet to the depths. Now here's where the game got really interesting for me. Alan wakes up in Emil Hartman's psychiatric hospital, Many media have done this trope before, where it turns out that the character was crazy all along, blah blah blah, but Alan Wake doesn't really do this. There were certainly enough hints along the way to indicate that Alan was making all this up, and it was indeed all in his head. And yet, there are some details that are just off. Hartman seems kind of sinister. But is that merely Alan's perception of him? Or is that Hartman as he truly is? Hartman says that Alice is dead, and Alan is suffering a psychotic break as a result. Hartman explains that Alan has managed to convince himself that the world is revolving around him, that his manuscripts are really bringing reality into line with his writing, but it's simply delusion. Hartman goes on to introduce the other patients, one of which is a game developer, apparently, and Hartman says, games are trash, of course, but it does involve some small creative effort. This is obviously poking fun at Remedy themselves, which is pretty funny. I said I wouldn't go in depth into side characters in this video, but I have to mention Odin and Tor at least once. They are shown as patients here, as insane old coots, but to Alan they are beacons of truth. They are aware of the darkness, they've fought it before. They direct him to go to a farm where they've written down how to fight the darkness, and they hand Alan a manuscript page, which one of them claims gave them a rash. I do not want to know where that page was. They also call Wake Thomas Zane. More on that later. Wake returns to his room and he struggles to write yet again. Before long, a jailbreak of sorts ensues, led by Odin and Tor, and it turns out that Barry was locked in a side room by Hartman, along with a cardboard cutout of Wake? Okay, this is looking less and less believable. Wake has gotta be crazy, and he backs up this theory by pulling a gun on Hartman seconds later. Just before the Wake is crazy theory is about to be confirmed, Hartman breaks the act and says this.
Ah, well, it was worth a shot. Really, Wake, come on. Let's work together on this. You have no idea.
Hartman, shut up!
The dark presence attacks, and Wake locks Hartman in the room, smiling as he walks away. In any interpretation, this seems a little bit evil on Wake's part, but I guess one could say that Hartman had it coming. It is then revealed that Hartman hired the fake kidnapper to try to get the manuscript from Wake. This ties up that plotline, I guess? It's unclear what exactly Hartman was trying to do, if Wake's version of events is to be believed, but if Wake's power does truly have the ability to change the world, that would be a powerful thing to possess, but I don't understand how Hartman would be able to take advantage of it. It does not at any point seem like Hartman is allied with the Dark Presence. In fact, it seems like since he ends up being taken by that they're almost enemies. So I'm not sure. Obviously, after that point, Alan then makes his way through a hedge maze, attends a concert with Barry, and drinks moonshine. Wait, what? They end up at Tor and Odin's old farmhouse, and there they find one of their songs. Actually a song by the real-life band, Poets of the Fall. Highly recommend their music, by the way. The lyrics are a riddle that lead Alan to the Lady of the Light, Cynthia Weaver, a lady first met at the diner with a lantern in hand. Here we get into a whole subplot, so deep breath. Here goes. Thomas Zane was a poet that existed at Cauldron Lake years before, along with his wife Barbara Jagger. Barbara drowned in the lake, and Thomas allegedly tried to write her back into existence. When she came back, the Dark Presence had taken over her form, and it tried to use Thomas Zane's writings to gain more power. Thomas, being an absolute Chad, wrote the volcanic eruption into existence, destroying the cabin and burying the Dark Presence in the lake. In order to do this, he also had to write himself out of existence, leaving behind only what was stored in his shoebox. Cynthia Weaver had an infatuation with Zane, and it appears that she now defends against the return of the Dark Presence. Whether through her own will or what Zane wrote, it's not clear. And she keeps guard over the shoebox in a well-lit room, which is one of the coolest locations in a story about light versus dark that I've ever seen. This leads us back to the present, where Alan and Barry get drunk on moonshine, I guess, and then the cops arrest them because, yeah. During this, Alan has a vision in which he realizes what happened during the missing week at the beginning of the game, after Alice fell into the lake. The Dark Presence, using the form of Barbara Jagger, had forced Alan to write Departure, so that all these events would come to pass and the Dark Presence would grow in strength. However, Alan had performed the same trick as Zane and written a loophole into the story. Or did Zane write Wake into existence, and Wake is just a fictional character that is in Zane's book? Zane is revealed to be a diver and the source of the strange light that has spoken to Wake before. Is Zane perhaps a fictional character written by Wake, to then write Wake as a fictional character in his own story? Okay, I'm not really sure on that one. Barry and Alan wake, again, up in a jail cell, captured by Nightingale while they were drunk. This doesn't last long, however, as Nightingale is taken by the Dark Presence within a few seconds. Having seen this happen, Sheriff Sarah Breaker assists Barry and Alan in their journey to the well-lit room. Barry gets a little hero moment with his cool outfit, and he definitely flirts with Sarah. They all arrive at the well-lit room, guided there by Cynthia Weaver. It is this moment that I will always remember in this game. It is my favorite cutscene, possibly of any game ever made. It is a moment that ties so many loose threads of the game together. Alan opens up the shoebox to reveal the clicker. The object that had kept Alan safe as a child, that had reminded him of his father's love for him, even though the only proof we have is the word of Alan's mother, who may have actually told a white lie in order to comfort a scared Alan. This plot point is a perfect encapsulation of the entire game. As I said at the start, this game is about not knowing the truth of things. Did Alan's father leave him the clicker? Or did his mom lie? Does it matter? Whether it was true or not, young little Alan needed to hear that from his mother, that his dad loved him, that in his fear and his darkness, he could rely on the love and the light. And this physical representation of this love that he had been given by his mother and his father is something that Alan had passed on to his wife Alice in this insignificant little light switch. Was Alan a good husband? Or was he out partying all the time with his friend Barry? Was he temperamental? Was he angry with everyone, including his wife? I would like to propose that Alan is probably both of those things. He has probably been a good husband, and he's probably been a terrible husband, but that his passing on of this clicker to his wife, this love, shows that he wants to protect Alice, that he has a very real desire to be a better man. Now, will this clicker now, this little detached light switch, it's not even plugged into anything, will it be able to do a single thing against the dark presence, this powerful eldritch horror? How could it not? Being imbued with as much light as it is. Alan has a flashback of a moment with Alice where they both argued about his partying during a tour. In the end, however, after both thinking it over, they make up and promise to go on vacation together. This hits pretty hard, knowing that Alice later used this vacation as an opportunity to try to get Alan psychiatric help. I don't know who to believe here. They both seem to have made mistakes, as anyone has, but in the end they still love each other. More on that later, though. Alan stands in the blinding lights of the well-lit room, remembering this and staring at the clicker in his hand. He can end this, and he will. After unnecessarily pulling a gun on the sheriff, he says he has to go alone. Either because he's heroic and doesn't want anyone else to get hurt, or possibly because he's a narcissist that believes only he can make a difference. I'm not sure. Barry hugs him then. Barry, the absolute bro. The friend that anyone should be proud to have. That being said, Wake was trying to point a gun at Sarah, but I guess it's fine. As Alan heads towards Cauldron Lake, he has some lingering doubts. He himself admits that it could all be a dream, a hallucination, but he realizes that it doesn't matter. His course is set. This is an interesting plot point because it takes the hallucination theory of the game, directly acknowledges it, and then says it doesn't matter and that Alan can't think this way. This is incredibly clever because it doesn't disprove the theory, but it just says that Alan, at least for his part, is willing to set it aside. For now. At least until he dives into Cauldron Lake and he wakes up in bed with Alice, who states that it's not real, it's a dream. She appeals to Alan to come back to bed, that he's scared of the dark. Alan retorts that she's always been the one that's been afraid of the dark, not him. And he tells her, turn the lights on. Prove that you're Alice. This whole scene is fascinating because it's possible that it's true. Maybe Alan was the one afraid of the dark all along. Maybe he was projecting his fears onto Alice. And of course, remember here that darkness and light are easy metaphors for love and hate, or fear, or what have you. But that's not the train of thought that Alan takes as he grabs hold of the clicker. Thomas Zane encourages Alan once again, and Alan catches a glimpse of an identical but evil version of him who Zane calls Mr. Scratch. No elaboration is given at this point, and Alan is suddenly in the dark place with words hovering around him. He hears Alice telling him that she's leaving him. She's found someone else, that he doesn't love her and he never did. We then hear Zane, in Alan's voice now, tying up Barbara Jagger, stabbing her, convinced that she is filled with darkness. This last bit of the main game shows a flip side to everything that's come before, for Alan and for Zane. They could both be the main villains of the story, and in fact, they could be the same person. Wild theory, Alice could have broken up with Wake before the game's events, and Wake may have murdered her in retaliation. This being such a traumatic event, Wake may have constructed an alternate personality called Zane that he projected that sin onto. Now Wake, not even remembering that Alice is dead, now that he's compartmentalized it, may be trying to save her from some unknown force. This being the darkest possible interpretation of the game, it's fitting that it's revealed right at the end, towards the heart of darkness. There are enough holes in it, however, that I don't buy into it. I do believe that it's either the dark presence or Alan's own mind playing tricks on him. For one, Zane is portrayed as a force for good throughout the entire game. It would be weird for Alan to project a version of himself that killed his wife in such a positive light. That wouldn't make a lot of sense. It also flies in the face of my clicker theory from earlier, so I don't really like that. It's worth mentioning as a possibility, though. Alan rejects all of these lies and lights up Barbara Jagger with the clicker, thus greatly weakening the dark presence and letting Alice go free. He writes himself into the dark place in exchange, and in the closing moments of the main game, he says that it's a long journey from the night back into the light. This could very easily be a metaphor for the long recovery of someone in depression, suffering from grief, as indeed the whole game could be. The final shots show Agent Nightingale as possibly possessed by the darkness, and the diner girl as New Lantern Girl. I'm not really sure what relevance that will have, but we'll see. Alan's final words are that it's not a lake, it's an ocean. I'm not entirely positive on the meaning of this, but there are plenty of fan theories. But we'll get to that. We still have DLC to go through. Moving on to the DLC, which actually has some of the best writing in the game, we start with Alan in the Dark Place. The first DLC is a good setup, depicting the insanity of the Dark Place, Barry returning as a guide, leading Alan through the twists and turns that a more maniacal version of Alan is apparently writing into existence. Zane explains that this is the irrational side of Alan trapped in the cabin, overcome by fear and crippling doubt. The playable Alan is the rational Alan, and as the second DLC begins, Alan is told to get to the lighthouse to reunite with his irrational self and to regain control of the Dark Place. Wait, are you telling me I'm not real? Alan asks Zane. You're as real as anything else in this place, Zane answers in the typical fashion of this game. There are two of me? Wake asks. Yes, Zane replies simply. And the one you called Mr. Scratch, he's me as well. No, Zane says, in one word, dispelling several fan theories, I'm sure. Zane, are you playing some kind of game with me? Alan says in an extremely meta way. I am not the author of your story, Zane says, dispelling even more theories. Alan isn't buying this last one, however, protesting that Zane had to be the author because he wrote the page about the clicker. Zane weakly starts to explain, but he ends with telling Alan to just continue forward. I absolutely adore this conversation, as it finally gives voice to a lot of fans' questions without giving many answers. In that moment, we feel Wake's frustration at being able to not piece things together. Because in that moment, he's us. We, and Alan, and all of us are just searching for the truth. Speaking of the truth, we then encounter the heaviest dialogue scene in the game, with phantoms of Dr. Hartman and Wake, with a TV on his head. Hartman explains that the car crash at the beginning of the game left Wake with head trauma, which, when combined with Wake's heavy drinking and insomnia, has led to hallucinations. Wake agrees with all of this. Hartman goes on to say that Wake is in denial, that his fantasy, the game thus far, has cast him as a heroic victim, allowing him to solve fake problems while avoiding his real ones. In this story, his personal problems, his paranoia for one, have been constructed as assets that allow him to save Alice, and indeed even the world. TV-headed Alan emotionlessly agrees to all of this. It seems to me that this TV-headed Alan is a stand-in for the real Alan, clearly. It doesn't seem to actually be him. It's either the irrational Alan trying to convince the rational Alan of his insanity, that he hurt Alice, that none of this is real, or Alan really does have a savior complex. He really is trying to convince himself that he's a good person to make up for all the wrong he's done to others and to Alice. There's a recording of Alice here, and I think I'll let her speak for herself.
All I ever wanted was to help you, Alan. I ate all the shit you handed out and tried to understand your pathetic, wealthy white male drama until my life consisted of managing your never-ending crisis. I hate you for your childish temper and the arrogance and self-indulgent pride that undermine all efforts to drag you out of the hole you insisted on digging for yourself. I hate you for leaving me in the dark with that insane monster bitch. All you had to do was act like a loving human being for once in your life and stay with me. If your dramatic exit hadn't been more important than making sure I was all right, she would never have taken me. I don't know where you went, but that's okay. I don't want to know. I don't think I'll ever be all right. The only thing that keeps me from killing myself is the hope that I'll never see you again.
Holy shit. That does not sound like anything Alice would ever say. Right? Well, a little bit later, with that undercurrent of hopeful music, Alice has this to say.
Let me tell you something, Alan. I know how your mind works. You screw up, then you start analyzing it, and before you know it, you start writing all these horror stories in your head. Don't you?
Come on, I don't think that.
Yes, you do. I know how it goes. You're a complete failure. I hate you, and I'll never forgive you for whatever it was that you did. Am I wrong?
Oh, man.
See? I know you. But Alan, it's all in your head. It is. I love you, and I'm not going anywhere.
That sounds more like the Alice we know. Or at least the Alice that we know through Wake's narrative, which may not in fact be the real Alice. Are any of us really ourselves apart from the perceptions of others? Is Alice really saying those things? Or perhaps maybe she has said both of those things at various points in their life? Which is closer to the truth? Alan clearly decides that he's going to hold on to hope, and he's going to get out of the dark place. He's going to get back to Alice. However, I made all that up. Alan never said any of those things. But it's very clear that that's what he's thinking. As he goes through the coolest gameplay sequence of the game, complete with rotating light from the lighthouse, removable rocks that let the light destroy all taken around you, and unlimited hordes on your tail. Finally reaching the lighthouse, Alan has to confront all of the illusions the dark place has made of his friends, including Barry, who up until now had been quite helpful. Barry taunts Alan with a lot of digs based around his surly demeanor and substance abuse. This is likely true, but one thing I am certain of, Barry would never say these things. He wouldn't ignore them, but he's a bro. Barry for life! Alan reunites with his irrational self, gaining control of himself and by extension, the dark place. And he sits down to write a sequel to Departure titled Return. He's coming back. In 13 years. The story ends on such a hopeful note that even if Alan was a bad husband in the past, that he can change now. That he's making his way out of his own dark place, just as we all can do the same. Something about the way Alice talks about Alan being lost inside his own head touches something deep inside most of us. It's easy to get lost in your own perception of yourself, which is always going to be harsher than that of your loved ones. And that perception that your loved ones have of you is not less real. That version of you is as real as you are. This truth when taken in combination with the idea of self-improvement, is something that will lead one to a state in which you can continually improve upon yourself and your own flaws while never losing sight of the fact that you are loved by those around you, that you are valued the way you are. When striking a balance between these two values, which many often oppose to each other, but they are not opposed, when taken in combination, they will make you both a better person and a happier person. Now, this is a major theme of one of my favorite shows as well, so it's fitting that one of my favorite games would have the same lesson. The fact that a game about a guy fighting shadows with a flashlight and shooting them in the face has as much deep lessons to be drawn from it is phenomenal. And obviously, that's why I'm making this video in the first place. But we have one more thing to talk about. Let's go back to the final line spoken by Alan at the end of the main game. It's not a lake, it's an ocean. To make sense of that, let's remember the poem that Zane gave to Wake at the very beginning of the game. For he did not know that beyond the lake he called home, there lied a deeper and darker ocean green, where waves are both wilder and more serene. To its ports I've been, to its ports I've been. With all that we've talked about, there are many theories that could have been made and have been made about the meaning of these words. And I think that part of the beauty of this game, as I've said, this unanswered mystery, is that any of those theories could be true. And taken in that sense, I think I have the theory to end all theories. The lake is the surface level of Alan Wake's story. It's the supernatural interpretation, that everything that happens is based in the dark presence being a real thing and actually affecting the world as some kind of eldritch horror. And from what I understand, that's the explanation given by Remedy's later game, Control. So the lake is the surface level, but the story of Alan Wake is an ocean. There are layers upon layers of meaning and numerous lessons to be drawn. Countless fan interpretations, little details like Thor and Odin making their moonshine with water from the lake, or Nightingale reading his own demise before it happens, or numerous other little lore fragments that add up to an incomplete whole, just teasing enough information to inspire fan theories for 13 years. And in this vast ocean, the waves are both much wilder, harder to understand, but more serene, more sensible, more comprehensible, more helpful than a mere surface level reading. To its ports I've been. For this video, in fact. To its ports I've been. And there I hope to return again. That was a teaser for Alan Wake 2, everybody. Get hyped. Thank you for watching this video. I enjoyed making it. It was a lot of fun. I had to do it very quickly, though. I had to make this video in 10 days before Alan Wake 2 released because I only thought of the idea as a result of one of my Twitch buddies suggesting it. And I was like, oh, shit, I never even thought about making a video about Alan Wake, even though it's like one of my favorite games, and I've thought about it a lot, and I'm obsessed with it. I could clearly make a video on this. I just never thought of it. So I had to make it very quickly, but I had just replayed the game on my Twitch stream, which you can check out now. A lot of the ideas in this video are inspired by things that chat members said while I was playing, because we like to meme around on the channel. We also like to talk about the meaning of the game. We like to do a little bit of both. We'll do a little bit of everything. So stop on by. That being said, I will be probably releasing a Halloween video as well this year. I don't anticipate that being canceled as a result of this video, but we'll have to see, I guess. Don't get spooked. You know, be on the lookout. Don't get spooked. If a surprise video appears, don't get scared. It might don't be surprised. It might be there. Might be there Halloween as usual. Appreciate you guys. Bye-bye.